At around 3:30 in the afternoon on stardate 44002.3, Starfleet would suffer one of its most dramatic losses to an outside threat in a single confrontation. This was the Battle of Wolf 359, only 7.9 light years from the Sol system, and it marked the first battle against the Borg. We see in the build-up to the battle and overhear part of the engagement, as well as witness the aftermath, but we don't see much of the battle itself outside of a few scenes. Starfleet deployed 40 ships to oppose the single Borg cube, but this single cube had recently assimilated the mind of Captain Jean-Luc Picard, and as such, it had an intimate knowledge of not only the Enterprise's plans, but the positions and formations Starfleet relied on for fleet deployment, as well as a general understanding of their ships. Additionally, this was the first time Starfleet had truly engaged the Borg, and they did not know the sheer level of power involved. When combined with the fact that the Borg therefore had superior intel, it's not surprising that the Starfleet was so soundly beaten. They'd even reached out to the Klingon Empire for reinforcements. However, these ships never arrived, leaving Starfleet and its 40 vessels to halt the Borg's advance. So, let's take a look at what the Apocrypha has to say about the battle breakdown and explore the Battle of Wolf 359 and those present to oppose Cube 632. The fleet was assembled in advance at Wolf 359 under the command of Admiral Hansen, who was taking the lead on this operation from the bridge of the only Galaxy-class ship in the fleet, which we never learn the name of, but after narrowing it down, I'm going to assume it's the USS Liberator NCC 67016. The Admiral reached out to the fleet and had them deploy into Formation Delta 3, which consisted of 3 lines of ships that could hit in waves and present enough of an obstacle to force the Borg cube to slow its approach. The formation had the heavy cruisers at the centre, while the edges were made up of the smaller frigates and more nimble ships. Here they waited in line, bracing for the incoming vessel, which then opened its hail and demanded Starfleet power down, disarm and escort the cube to Earth for assimilation to begin. The front line of 12 ships was ordered to accelerate in and begin attacking the cube, and they opened fire with a bombardment of photon torpedoes and phaser blasts, each calibrated to a different frequency in order to overcome the Borg's shielding. However, this did not work, as presumably these frequencies were expected by Picard and the Borg had preemptively adapted to them. As the ships began to break and turn away to allow the second line to unleash their firepower, the Borg returned fire and destroyed the USS Melbourne, crippled the USS Saratoga and another 2 vessels from the initial wave. The second line opened fire, but immediately was tasked with providing covering fire so that the limping and damaged vessels could retreat back to the rear and repair. But all this served to do was draw fire from the Borg cube, which immediately began targeting the second line while continuing to cripple the first. Among the next wave of ships to lose were the USS Bonestell and the Firebrand, while the cube closed in. The second line was then forced to part, with the Yamaguchi disengaging to port, while the cube switched to make a hole in the line by destroying the Kyushu, Princeton and the McKinley. By this point, only 2 minutes and 30 seconds had passed, and already around a dozen ships were lost or drifting. This had kicked up a debris field in the firing line of the third line, and generally made it an issue of focusing fire, as space was now littered with the hulks of destroyed ships, escape pods, and emergency shuttles with survivors aboard. Starfleet was not going to fire indiscriminately into this field and risk killing survivors, but the Borg had no compunctions about doing just that, even if they did probably also sneak in a few transporter beams to grab people from their unprotected escape pods for assimilation. Additionally, the Borg would use the debris field to their advantage, and use their advanced tractor beams to steer approaching ships into the wrecks to destroy more ships. On top of this, Borg drones were being beamed aboard Starfleet vessels if their shields were lacking in an attempt to occupy a crew from mounting a defence or recovering. At 4 minutes in, Admiral Hansen ordered a retreat and a regroup of the third line, and surviving ships with a staggered pattern to allow for the ships to continue firing back at the cube and cover each other as they pulled out. There were only 16 vessels left, 3 of which were heavily damaged, and now Starfleet was retreating as the cube pushed through ever closer to Earth. The Yamaguchi and the Awane were destroyed at this point, and Admiral Hansen reached out to the USS Enterprise with a set of coordinates to regroup at, but he was cut off, as presumably the USS Liberator was lost with Hansen on board. At this point, the cube simply picked off those ships that were in the way until the Nebula-class USS Endeavour, under the command of Captain Amasov, was the only vessel left. The other 39 ships all destroyed. The captain would chalk his ship's survival to dumb luck, although half the crew was still lost. The Enterprise D would pass through the remnants of Wolf 359's fleet minutes later, expecting to join the battle, to find it already over, and 11,000 souls lost. Additionally, a single civilian ship was apparently also caught in the retreating fleet and was also destroyed, and the total battle had lasted only 6 minutes. A state of emergency was declared on Earth and the Enterprise set off in pursuit, fortunately able to rescue Picard and save the Federation, but the cost was incredibly high. It was, of course, this battle that accelerated Starfleet's modernisation of its armada, considering Oberth and Miranda-class ships were deployed into combat alongside only 1 Galaxy-class and about 3 Nebula. However, it's worth noting that the next time the Federation engaged the Borg cubes, well, they did so by swarming it, and they kept moving. No defensive lines, no holding ground to try to halt them, just harrying them as they went without letting up, and that worked far better. Although even that Borg cube made it all the way to Sector 001. So, what could have Starfleet done differently? Well, unfortunately, I don't think they could have done much with the time frame they had, not once the Borg had Picard's mind and his intimate knowledge of the Federation's play. The Borg had an unfair and complete advantage that was only bolstered by their radically advanced technology. Maybe not playing so defensively may have prolonged the battle, but as the next encounter and future encounters with the Borg will reveal, the only real way to defeat them is to play dirty, to turn their tech against them, infiltrate their systems, and exploit their weaknesses. In a military confrontation, the Borg will win, hands down, every time, unless Starfleet shares the insight and knowledge the Borg can bring against their opponents. Borg ships are just too overwhelmingly powerful. Overall, the Battle of Wolf 359, I believe, was unwinnable from the outset, and recognition of this is what led Starfleet to undergo such drastic changes in ship design and operation in the next few years. It ended the golden age of exploration they had been experiencing, but allowed them to weather the next decade of turmoil, though at great cost. Thanks for watching this breakdown of the Battle of Wolf 359. Apologies for the delay in videos. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I have been all flued up for a while now, but I needed to get this one out there. So thanks again for watching. I've been Rick, and I'll see you next time for another video. Goodbye.